My name's Humphrey Walwyn. I head up Visit England Research. This is just a sort of short deck. It's probably going to be covering off very similar subjects to what Malcolm has been talking about with regards to the domestic audience. But I'm going to start by giving a national view, but just to sort of say that all of this data is coming from the domestic sentiment tracker. So the domestic sentiment tracker is delivered in partnership with BVA, BDRC, and Visit Scotland and Visit Wales. Its fieldwork has been undertaken. It's taken place regularly since about May 2020, and it started with a cadence of a wave of research once a week through the summer of 2020. That was reduced to fortnightly from September 2020 to September 2021, and from November it's been monthly. And the change in that cadence is reflecting the speed at which the data was changing. So as the pandemic lasted longer and longer, we saw a slower, more cautious changing of attitudes. And so it didn't make sense to track it every week. It's drawn from a UK nationally representative sample of around 1,500 adults aged 16 plus, but there are also additional boosts to that sample to ensure that Scotland and Wales can cover their populations more robustly. So the latest wave is from the 1st to the 7th of March, and that was published on the 15th of March. The next wave will be covering the 1st to the 7th of April, and that'll be published just after Easter on the 19th of April. The final wave of this contract will be in May, sort of similar time, sort of 15th of May, it'll be published. But we're hoping to continue this. It's not yet confirmed, but we're just thinking that it's something that we would like to keep going throughout the summer. I know you'll probably, by the end of this presentation, understand why. So one of the main questions that's been going since the beginning of the pandemic is a measure of how the British public is perceiving the situation. So in the coming months, which of the following best describes your opinion? Is the worst still to come, which is in the dark blue at the top? Are the things going to stay the same, which is the light blue in the middle? Or the worst has passed in green? In this graph, you can see the whole story of COVID is described by the British public's perceptions and mood. Back in April 2020, 76% believed the worst was still to come, but fairly quickly through May, we started to see that around 1/3 of the population believed the worst had passed. That first summer, as you know, was full of hesitancy and caution, and as you can see from May, the negativity started to grow all the way through late summer and early autumn, with local lockdowns, to October 2020, where we see a spike in the worst has yet to come, around 66%, with the announcement of the second national lockdown, and then again in January following the third national lockdown. Now, despite the national lockdown being in effect for the first quarter of 2021, the perceptions improved as the vaccine rolled out, lifted people's spirits, with the worst has passed increasing through February to May to reach around 48% of the population. However, it soon became apparent that the vaccine was not a sort of panacea, and we saw through June to July a decrease in positivity. So the situation remained mostly unchanged through autumn 2021 until the emergence of Omicron, which saw an increase in concern with the worst is still to come at around 33% in December 2021. However, the concerns were reduced with the booster vaccine and people's fears ebbed away. And since February 2022, we now have a majority of people saying that the worst has passed. So we may see this change a bit next month, given the current news of, I think it's 1 in 16 in the UK having COVID, but I believe it's fair to say that we've begun to live with COVID. Another question we ask is how comfortable people are in doing particular activities in the next month. And again, this reflects the various waves, lockdowns, vaccine rollouts, and the general return to normality. And we ask people to score out of 4 how comfortable they are in doing certain activities. So 1 is not at all comfortable, and 4 is very comfortable. Each measure tells its own story, with the most comfortable activities returning to normality quickest. There's being shopping and eating in a restaurant, and their initial rise is no doubt driven by people's behaviours as they return to normality in that first summer of COVID, with people shopping and eating at restaurants over the summer of 2021, over the summer of 2020. So the least comforting was when using public transport, which remained low for most of 2020, before all measures dropped again in January 2021 with the third lockdown. Over 2021, we saw large increases in comfort across all activities as the vaccine rolled out and people started to return to their normal activities. We also introduced new measures around visiting a busy city centre, visiting indoor attractions, and there are some others as well. The spike in comfort using public transport and visiting a city centre in September, that's likely linked to the return to work in offices for many people in major cities. As they started to do the activity, they became more accepting and comfortable doing it. So we saw another dip in December and January with the emergence of Omicron, but that has since recovered. And we can now see that the comfort in most activities is firmly in the fairly to very comfortable on average. And it's really fascinating to see how comfort is not only driven by the external forces of COVID waves and the vaccine rollout, but also the behavioural factors where by doing an activity, people on the whole tend to be more comfortable with it. In order to understand what activities are most likely to be affected by COVID and the lifting of restrictions, we ask a series of questions about intent to do or go to various leisure experiences in the next 12 months. And you can see in this graph that the light grey at the bottom is the percentage of the population likely to do that activity in the next month. And just above that in the darker grey is the percentage of the population who believes that they will do this activity in the next year. And jumping to the top of the graph, you see in dark blue is the percentage of the population who say that they would never normally visit or do that activity. And so the key measure to focus on here is that light blue seam that sits second from top. These are people who say that this is an activity that they would normally do in a 12-month period, but would not do due to COVID. And as you can see, most activities have a very small percentage of people saying they won't do that activity due to COVID. And the activities where the highest proportion of those people who would normally do that activity say that they will not be doing so due to COVID are going to a nightclub, where around half the people who would normally go say that they will not go due to COVID. Going to a festival or exhibition in an enclosed space, but also in a large space as well, also has a significant COVID gap, which is what we used to call out the missing intent due to COVID. Also, indoor play and going to a cinema or theatre, but both show around a quarter of those who would normally go to these activities will not be attending due to COVID. Similarly, we look at physical and sporting activities. Now, the most obvious thing here to say is that most people don't tend to do these activities. That's why most of them are dark blue. But those where there is a large enough base of people saying that this is something they would normally do in a 12-month period, we can see that indoor swimming and spa and health treatments are the most effective, with around 1/4 saying that they would normally not do those activities due to COVID. Another question that we have continued to monitor throughout this study is what steps should leisure and tourism businesses take to ensure that guests are comfortable and that concerns are met? And this asks respondents which conditions would be essential for indoor tourism and leisure providers to have in place for them to visit and use them over the next few months. And top of the list since the summer of 2020 is that free cancellation. People are far more concerned about unforeseen circumstances and therefore expect this to be something that they can pull out from if the need arises. The second and third most important factors are plentiful hand sanitizers and enhanced cleaning regimes, which have also continued to be in the top 5 or so throughout the research. And many of these measures have placed in the middle for the duration of the research and are important to at least a quarter of all potential visitors. So, attention should be paid to them where possible. However, we do see some trending over time, which you can see in the table in the bottom right. You'll notice that we group the different measures up into different themes, such as reduced contamination measures are in red, and that covers all the cleaning and preventative measures, such as contactless check-in and payments. And the two that have reduced the most over the last few months have been the guest interventions in green, and that tends to cover staff and customers wearing masks. And you can see that this has dropped by over 10% since November. Also, social distancing measures in grey, which have dropped from a majority of 57% to now around 45%. Again, makes sense behaviourally as people open up and these restrictions don't tend to be enforced as much, that people are becoming more comfortable in those areas. So they're still important, with just over 40% of the population saying that wearing a mask and social distancing measures are required, but this is changing. The financial booking incentives, such as free cancellation and transferable bookings to a later date, are the one measure that has dropped slightly. but it's still required by 58% of the public. So we're going to look at some intent measures now for the coming spring primarily, but also summer. So when we look at intent to take a domestic holiday this spring, April to June, and summer, July to September, we can see that relative to last year, there was a significantly higher intent amongst the population to take a domestic holiday in spring. Unsurprising, in March 2021, when asked, the response was 16% of UK adults were planning to take an overnight trip. And that's now risen to 23% when asked in March 2022. Now, obviously, the difference is that spring last year, there were still several restrictions in place that slowly unlocked from April to June. So we should hopefully see a strong spring this year, especially with extended bank holiday weekend at the beginning of June. Summer, on the other hand, shows similar levels of intent at the same point last year. So hopefully we should see another strong summer domestically. Obviously, the key difference this year is the greater certainty about taking a holiday abroad. However, I can tell you that while not shown on this graph, the intent to take a holiday abroad this spring is around 15% compared to the 23% we see in domestic, while summer is around 24% versus the domestic of 39%. So we do see domestic intent at least 50% more likely than abroad. And over the last few months, we have not seen any major shifts in intent, either domestically or abroad, which given as you saw that the concern prior to Christmas around COVID shows that for the most part, people do expect the spring and summer to go ahead without restriction, but more on that later. When you look at the destination type people are looking to visit, it's no surprise to see that the rural and coastal destinations show particularly high intent over the summer, with around 22% of the population looking to visit a coastal town at some point between July and September. And the least likely to be visited destination over the summer are cities, which is not surprising. But given cities are reliant on that inbound tourism, it is a major concern for them. So as domestic tourists are the only way for them to plug that gap, as it were. So hence, that's the reason why you might have seen it, the Visit England campaign is currently focused on getting domestic tourists to visit cities. As for booking these trips, it's not surprising to see that when looking at the UK trip intenders, they tend to book their trip generally up to 3 months ahead of going away, with the summer trips more likely than spring trips to be booked 3+ months ahead. Obviously, many main family holidays will have booked further in advance, but for a lot of intenders outside of school holidays, there is more freedom to wait closer to the time. We've also been tracking since late last year barriers that are likely to affect holiday plans. Now, we used to ask this of people who only weren't taking holidays. We're now asking this of everyone. From a long list, which includes government restrictions and limitations on experiences, and of course the concerns around catching COVID, we've started to see a new concern rise, or maybe that's fair to say, stay afloat above the other barriers. Sorry, just gonna have to cough if I can find the mute button. Apologies. Just coming out of a cold, and my daughter has also got norovirus, so it's all sort of go in my house. So the graph here shows in the blue the percentage of people stating concerns around catching COVID as a potential barrier to a summer domestic holiday. This has declined from a low 20% in December to around 12% in March, which is in line with what you saw at the beginning of this presentation, which showed people's comfort with COVID becoming more acceptable. We see, however, that the top concern is now personal finances and green, and this has risen slightly over the last few months and really stands out from the other concerns which have dropped away. And this is definitely a cost of living concern that, as anyone who has had to renew their energy tariff will tell you, is a major issue. And a bit more detail, looking closer at that concern around personal finances, but also a similar barrier that we have asked about, which is the rising cost of holidays. Both have changed significantly in the last few months. And here we are looking at the change in reporting these barriers as concerns between January and February. So the change in January and February, and we're looking at it by life stage. So pre-nesters are those aged 18 to 44 years old with no kids. Families are those with children in the household. Older independents are 45 to 70 with no children in the household. And then retirees are 70+. So what you can see is that personal finances between January and February waves of this research, there was a significant increase in pre-nesters and families saying that they saw personal finances as a concern, increasing by around 10% in 1 month. And for the rising cost of holidays, which is different to personal finances, is that they perceive the cost to be a concern, even if their personal finances are secure. We see that families listing rising costs as a possible barrier to a domestic summer holiday almost double, from 17% to 30%. So personal finances and the rising cost of overseas travel are also identified as top barriers to holidays abroad, although at a slightly lower percentage than domestic. I don't think that means that they are less concerned about the cost of living. It's more likely due to other concerns coming to the fore, such as travel restrictions and quarantine concerns, but being more of an immediate concern. But we're certainly seeing the cost of living bear out both overseas and domestic. And these domestic barriers are now where we are most concerned, as it could stifle the recovery. So far, we've not seen any impact on intent to holiday, domestic or abroad. And we believe that it is unlikely to dampen the appetite for taking time off away from home. So many people, still have a COVID dividend from the lockdown that they're looking to spend, and the holiday is a key priority. However, we do believe that the cost of living crisis could impact more incidental trips, such as weekends away, that are not planned so far ahead. So, we're not necessarily seeing the intent impacts at the moment because no one's really thought about it at that point. So we'll continue to monitor the situation, but that's where we're looking to focus a bit more over the next couple of waves. And if we were to continue, we would definitely be focusing on this and the impact it would have on the summer. So we're going to look at some information available from our profile report. This is published earlier in March. This report takes a couple of waves of research and combines them to create a more robust data set that allows us to understand the profile of visitors to certain destination types and regions. Again, this is available online at visitbritain.org. It's under England Research, the COVID-19 Consumer Sentiment Tracker. So looking at intent by region, we can see that, as it was last year, that the Southwest is the most popular destination among intenders. Now, compared to last year, you can see that the percentage of intenders saying that they will visit the Southwest in spring is lower. It's down 29%, from 29% to 18%. But that's because we had previously seen the level of intent to take a holiday was significantly lower in spring last year. So again, it's a smaller sort of base size. And so do not look at these as absolute numbers. The fewer numbers planning to holiday last spring just focused more on the Southwest. The Southwest is still clearly leads the way for spring. And I think we've estimated this around 1.5 million people saying that they intend to a trip there this spring. As for summer, we know that the intent to take a domestic holiday is similar to last year, and we can see here that the intent to travel to the Southwest is similar to last year. So again, we should expect similar visitors to last year if the cost of living crisis doesn't impact intent too much. As to whom is likely to visit this spring, well, the Southwest, like most other destinations aside from London, is looking to families to make up a significant proportion of visitors, roughly around 39% of intenders. The most likely life stage after that is older independents, so 45 to 70-year-olds with no kids. That's around 30% of intenders, then retirees. And the main difference to the rest of the country is that the Southwest would expect to see a lower proportion of pre-nesters. However, again, recognizing that the Southwest is the most popular region to visit, these in absolute figures are not necessarily comparable. I think I was doing some back at maths last night, and effectively, despite the north of England having 17% of intenders saying that there would be pre-nesters, that actually equates to similar numbers to the Southwest in absolute numbers. Where are these people likely to come from? Well, unsurprisingly, this is mainly driven by geography, with 25% of spring intenders planning to come from the southeast. Behind that, 21% of southwest spring intenders are coming from the southwest itself. And then we drop down to the other regions of the UK, with the northeast being the least likely resident region for spring intenders. Now we do ask what destination type they're likely to visit, and I realize that this is the least surprising slide I could possibly show you, but 52% of those visiting the Southwest are aiming to visit a coastal or seaside town versus 33% for the rest of England. And the only destination type that significantly under indexes versus the rest of the country is a city or large town, but again, not surprising. Looking at the party makeup of the spring intenders, we can see that compared to the other areas of England, there is a focus on those intending to visit with family and pets. So 53% plan to visit with a partner, 39% plan to visit with children, 14% plan to visit with friends, 12% plan to visit with pets, and only 5% will travel alone. Looking at the type of accommodation that spring intenders to the southwest are looking to stay in, you can see that the commercial rentals and camping and caravanning lead the way and do over-index compared to the rest of England. Hotels are less likely to be used as accommodation in the southwest relative to the rest of England, as are private homes, which does include Airbnbs. Just to let you know, we are likely to change that definition and try to move them out separately if we can have robust enough numbers. I think there's obviously an issue with the classification of Airbnb in that people either classify it as a private home or a commercial rental, and we need to make sure that we're classifying it correctly. But we hope to be able to split that out and report that separately. Also looking at the length of trip, and most likely given the geographic distance we're talking and the options available when you're looking for accommodation, it's not surprising to see that the significant majority of visitors to the southwest in spring are looking to spend more than 4 nights, with around 68% of the southwest spring intenders looking to stay more than 4 nights versus 54% for the rest of the UK. I'm just going to finish this presentation by showcasing that a lot of the information that I've just shown you in this last section is from the profile reports, and that's, as I said, available on the website. There's a handy profile slide for spring traditional seaside town intenders. So that gives you a lot of information I've just shown you in a handy one slider. This profile report covers spring, but we'll be publishing in May a profile report that focuses on summer, so July to September intenders.